Tonight, yet another cabinet shakeup. This time, EPA head Scott Pruitt is out. The question, though, isn't why, it's why it took so long. Then more frustration over immigration. The Statue of Liberty protester angry about the government separating families at the border. So are a lot of other people. We'll debate whether demonstrations and confrontations are the best way to fight these policies. Then some shocking poll numbers about the president and how people feel about the country. We'll dissect and discuss. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in tonight for Richard French. Scott Pruitt is out as the head of the Environmental Protection Agency. Not only did Pruitt fail to protect the environment, he was also wrapped up in a slew of scandals that led to his downfall.
After months of scandal, embattled EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt is out. As he flew to a rally in Montana, President Trump tweeted he had accepted Pruitt's resignation, writing, "Scott has done an outstanding job, and I will always be thankful to him." Just last night, Pruitt was mingling with guests at the White House 4th of July celebration.
Administrator Scott Pruitt and Ambassador Bob Lighthizer, thank you for being here.
Pruitt has been under fire for months for a series of ethical lapses tied to his spending, staff management, ties to lobbyists, and a sweetheart housing deal where he paid only $50 a night. Pruitt had been the subject of a dozen ethics investigations. Most recently, there were questions about whether Pruitt used his clout to try to get his wife a Chick-fil-A franchise.
My wife is an entrepreneur herself. She loves, we love. Chick-fil-A is a franchise of faith.
Throughout the scandals, President Trump publicly praised Pruitt, who oversaw the undoing of many Obama-era environmental and climate rules.
EPA is doing really, really well. And, somebody has to say that about you a little bit. You know that, Scott.
Even some Republicans called for him to go.
He is about as swampy as you get here in Washington, D.C.
Earlier this week, Pruitt was confronted at a D.C. restaurant by a woman pushing him to step down.
Let's discuss with our panel tonight. We're joined tonight by Charlie King. He's the New York co-chairman at Mercury Public Affairs and was a senior campaign advisor to Andrew Cuomo's re-election campaign. On the other side of the table, it really is the other side of the table. Conservative strategist Bill O'Reilly, also the communications director for the Molinaro gubernatorial campaign. Next to him, Richard St. Paul, Republican strategist and former vice chair for the National Black Republican Association. Bill, I'll start with you. Reaction to Pruitt.
This should have happened weeks ago. I mean, the guy had 14 investigations going. I think what happens was he finally broke the cardinal rule in the Trump administration, which is don't get too much press. And I don't know why today was the day, but today was the day. I mean, maybe it was just a late holiday, part of the week. But he had a number of reasons to leave, to be dismissed, but he hung in throughout them all. And then right after 4th of July, he goes. So no surprise on him leaving. Just the timing was rather odd.
Charlie?
Look, I mean, it's we play a card game, the bingo game where you have the different members of the with scandals a minute, with Richard and to a lesser extent Bill O'Reilly over there, we're going to hold their feet to the fire. It's ridiculous. I mean, one of the Republicans said this is about as swampy as we can get. The entire Trump administration is just an entire cesspool of swampism. And I think, Richard, for you and for all Republicans, it's time to own this and own it and talk about the fact that you got to clean this up. I mean, it's your party, and you got to change it and not just sort of shrug it off and say that this, even that it took so long, you got to, fish is rotting from the head.
I would agree that Charlie is very well qualified to talk about swampiness and scandals. Being that he worked for Governor Cuomo, we're still reeling from that.
Pruitt?
But Pruitt, I would say, is no surprise. I mean, 14 investigations. It was just a matter of time. There's no surprise. And probably today was the day because we were going to hear something else come out about him.
Well, that's my next question, because if there was a tipping point for Scott Pruitt, it was probably like 15 scandals ago that he was getting more press than the president was, or getting bad press. Why now? I mean, I know we've touched the surface on that, but I'll start with you. Why now? You really think there's something cooking out there?
There could be something else cooking out there.
Worse than what we've heard already?
Well, what we heard already was bad, but it wasn't that any one of those events should have called for his resignation.
Right, there weren't big criminal investigations.
Right, exactly.
Right.
It was the number of scandals that he was involved in. It was just too many.
Richard,
trying to get his wife a job at Chick-fil-A and use
where was your voice when all this was happening? I mean, why were you content to let this individual stay in the president's cabinet, and you were mute about this issue? I mean, why were you comfortable with it?
Absolutely not. If anybody ever asked me, do I think that that's something that you want to have those scandals?
Does someone have to ask you does someone have to ask you to speak
Am
up?
I supposed to go on Twitter?
I think you called me and said that.
By the
Should I go on Twitter and
did you
Facebook
step
and
on
mention it?
Charlie's foot before the show? Did you
But
steal
I'm
his bicycle?
enjoying the back and
I had a
forth.
milkshake today. I'm on a sugar rush.
And a
I would,
healthy
on a
breakfast.
I would
sugar rush
never agree
today.
that anything that Pruitt did was something that should be acceptable. It's not acceptable.
It could be that there's a replacement in place now. It could be just that they were looking and vetting and they finally got one.
Although one of the things that a lot of people think kept Pruitt on as long as he was is that a lot of folks thought that Trump was kept him in place as a possible emergency replacement for Jeff Sessions, in case Sessions had to go.
Well,
Pruitt was the Attorney General of Oklahoma. He certainly would have fired Robert Mueller.
Well, isn't that a hoot? I mean, God bless America that this is the way the Trump administration thinks. The guy's a scandal a minute, and they're holding him up just in case they can get rid of Sessions, who is no great shakes from the start.
Charlie, Pruitt had been something of a cudgel that was being swung by Democrats against the Trump administration. Look at an example of the swamp and all the decisions, not to mention his environmental policies. Can Democrats still make an effective weapon, if you will, out of Pruitt even after his resignation?
You know, the bad news is probably not, but the good news is that the Trump administration is like a bunch of grapes. You know, one grape falls, you still got a whole bunch of grapes of issues that you can pick on.
There is literally no metaphor we're not going to go through on the show tonight.
Well, the thing is, you can, and whether it's Republican or Democrat, you can survive almost anything these days if you just ignore the news cycle and you go through it. Right. And if you're not going to get fired, you can just keep going and going because something else is going to pop up in the news and that's going to get followed. Yeah. And you see it on both sides of the aisle. You see people just weathering things out that would have made them resign 10 years ago in a day. Well, it doesn't happen anymore.
I would say almost exactly that. It's politics is a lot like life or relationships, where the issue is there for the moment, but then other events just supersede it. I mean, if we can't even keep track of how many issues there have been in the Trump world, that we just can't keep track of them. And I'm not saying that critically. It's just so many things moving so fast that something else will take place, and this will be in the rearview mirror very quickly.
Richard, what's the Republican spin going to look like on Pruitt's resignation? What's going to be the message tonight on Fox?
The message is simply that Pruitt's out and that
pushed out by Democrats unfairly. I mean, seriously,
no,
give me the rhetoric.
There is no pretty way to encapsulate this. It is what it is. There was a number of different scandals he was involved in, and I call them scandals because some of the stuff. Not to say that these were, as you say, criminal, but they certainly were a lot having to do with unethical. And so it will be a very quick news cycle for Pruitt. He's out, and that's it. Moving on to the next subject.
They'll praise deregulations. They'll say he did a good job at the EPA. He got the economy helping going again.
I think is what the president said.
Yeah, they'll praise that regulation.
Pruitt saying that he fell victim to too many partisan attacks. Is that going to play? Is that going to play?
It'll get him through the day. It's enough to get through the day and enough to get through the week, and then it's done. Then it's on to the next thing.
Okay. And by the way, at some point, check on for yourself the moves that he made actually regarding the environment while he was running the EPA. That's a whole other box of potential scandals just in terms of the policy decisions that were made, but that's for another day. Up next, still more questions than answers about the government separating families at the border. The one thing we do know, it's getting worse instead of better, and we have the numbers, or at least some of them, to prove it.